In 1789, the nation's records, which would one day occupy miles of federal buildings, were in the hands of one man, Charles Thomson. For nearly 15 years, Mr. Thomson had saved the legislative documents of the young nation's history. He was the sole surviving link between the old order and the new government established for the Constitution. Charles Thomson passed the torch. I'm Lillian Gish for Constitution Minutes.
In 1787, a foreign power still maintained troops on American soil. With almost no opposing army, British garrisons held forts on the American frontier despite the peace treaty of 1783. The new Constitution, however, empowered our government to raise a national army. In August 1794, U.S. troops led by General Mad Anthony Wayne pursued hostile Indians toward a British fort. If the British gave sanctuary, war with America loomed. The gates stayed closed. Their power challenged, the British agreed in the Jay Treaty to withdraw their forces. I'm Arlene Dahl for Constitution Minutes.
The Constitutional Convention gave birth to a nation whose appetite for trivial facts was to become enormous. So, some facts about the delegates. The oldest was Ben Franklin at 81. The youngest, Jonathan Dayton at 26. Gunning Bedford was the heaviest at 300 pounds. George Washington was both the tallest at 6 feet 3 inches and the richest. Of the 55 delegates, 31 were college graduates, 8 had signed the Declaration of Independence, and many had cities named after them. Let's see, there's Washington and Madison. How many can you name? And don't forget Patterson. I'm Barbara Walters for Constitution Minutes.
In April 1789, George Washington's two-week inauguration journey from Mount Vernon to New York was America's first national celebration. Washington was welcomed by cheering crowds in every hamlet and village along his route. He was rowed in a ceremonial barge to Lower Manhattan as ships' cannons boomed their salutes and choristers sang, "God Save Great Washington." He delivered his inaugural in a clear voice, though his hands trembled as he turned the pages of his address. And why not? He was launching history's greatest experiment in freedom. I'm Tony Randall for Constitution Minutes.
Contempt for the young United States by the old countries of Europe went beyond things political. In the weak, fragmented nation, there were few patrons of the arts. Talented native artists like John Trumbull, panoramist of the Revolution, and Gilbert Stuart, painter of Washington, had gone to Europe to advance their careers. But the new Constitution brought the nation respect abroad and a budding cultural revolution at home. The expatriates flocked back to lead it. Philadelphia soon became a powerful, growing center of the arts. I'm Robert Vaughn for Constitution Minutes.
The delegation from New Hampshire struggled exhausted into Philadelphia 2 months after the start of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, making perhaps 20 miles a day on horseback over winding and unpaved roads and crossing trackless mountains and unbridged rivers. Their journey took the same amount of time it would take to travel 12 times around the world in a modern jet. Following the adoption of the Constitution, the federal government gradually asserted the authority to appropriate money for what was to become the finest national highway and communication system in the world. I'm Dick Cavett for Constitution Minutes.
Today, the original Constitution is displayed only behind bulletproof glass and protected by armed guards. This worshipful attitude was late in coming. In 1814, when the British burned Washington, the document was unceremoniously thrown into a wagon for a trip to Virginia. It spent the night in a grist mill, where it is said the miller contemplated dumping it. It was later kept in a safe undisplayed for 50 years. After World War II, the original Constitution was taken to the National Archives in an armored personnel carrier. There it remains, at last, safe and still revered. I'm Geraldine Fitzgerald for Constitution Minute.
In 1786, the founding fathers who had defied the noose in the Revolution trembled at the onset of armed rebellion. The nation had slid into a depression that wreaked havoc on small farmers like Daniel Shays, who led an armed attack against a federal arsenal in Massachusetts. Now, Shays' rebels were driven off by a state militia, but the nation's leaders realized that under the old Articles of Confederation, the federal government was impotent in such crises. They pressed for a new constitution, one with the power to put down such uprisings and guarantee every state a republican form of government. I'm Paul Sorvino for Constitution Minutes.
On the eve of the Constitutional Convention, George Washington declared, "I predict the worst consequences from a half-starved, limping government, always moving on crutches and tottering at every step. These were sledgehammer blows struck at the central government, operating under our first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. Washington's views were shared by other nationalists, by James Madison of Virginia, and the two New Yorkers, Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. These critics clearly saw the glaring weaknesses. The old national government had no power to levy and collect taxes. It only could call upon the states for requisitions. Robert Morris, who had been superintendent of finance, declared that speaking to the states was like preaching to the dead. The response was so poor. The central government had no power to regulate commerce, and states passed tariff laws against each other. Nor did the central government have the power to levy a tariff against foreign goods dumped on our shores. Such dumping of goods brought on a depression, and the bad times led to an uprising of debtors in New England. In short, the government could not maintain order at home and lacked respect abroad. It was time for a change.
These Constitution Minutes are officially recognized by the Commission on the Bicentennial of the United States Constitution.